Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Fair Housing Insiders. This is episode 61. I'm your host, Jonathan Sarr, and today we have Kathy Williams with us, and we are going to be talking about fair housing complaints. And Kathy has been kind enough to join us today to outline an 8-step process. So, Kathy, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jonathan. I spent so much of my career responding to fair housing complaints that were made against my clients and defending them. So let's take this opportunity for me to share the things I learned over a very long career defending fair housing complaints.
And we're very, very grateful for that. So, we look forward to this discussion today. So just as a reminder for housekeeping, please sign up for our newsletter. We thank you to our wonderful Fair Housing Insiders community. And if you haven't followed us already on Instagram, at Fair Housing Institute is our handle. So Kathy, let's jump into our scenario before we get into the 8 steps that you've outlined for us today when dealing with a fair housing complaint. So our scenario is a property manager who has called their regional manager and states that she has received a fair housing complaint via email from a resident. So let's take a look at the scenario, and then we'll get your feedback and comments on what we see here.
I've received a fair housing complaint in the mail that was filed by Nancy Moody, that horrible resident I've been telling you about for the past several months.
Yes, I remember you telling me how frustrated you've been with Miss Moody.
I've spent more time trying to appease Ms. Moody than I've spent on all the other 150 residents. She has been a constant source of complaints and problems, and now, after all the time I've spent, she's accusing me of discrimination. I am furious, and I know that this complaint will take endless time, effort, and money to respond to Ms. Moody's lies. I'd like to non-renew her lease next time it comes up so I can finally get rid of this troublemaker.
Okay, intriguing scenario. So Kathy, what are your thoughts on what we just witnessed here?
Okay, so the first thing I have to say is don't do what this property manager is suggesting. And I would hope the regional would know better. There are other things that need to be done, but one of them is not to non-renew this resident's lease because she filed a fair housing complaint against you. What to do instead? So the first thing is someone, the property manager, the regional, whoever is going to be the go-to person in the company about this complaint needs to read it carefully and understand the allegation. Who is the complainant? Are they a current resident? Are they a past resident? If they're a current resident, make sure that the property staff immediately is informed how to handle all future contacts with that complainant now, so you can avoid allegations of retaliation, which, by the way, is what the non-renewal would have been, a violation of the Fair Housing Act, because it would have been done in retaliation for that resident filing the complaint. Also, if the investigative agency contacts the property, they need to be told who they should be talking to. And it should not be just any employee that works for that property. And finally, be aware that sometimes the first notice that you may get in the mail will come from HUD, saying that a fair housing complaint has been filed. It attaches a copy of the complaint, but it will say the investigative agency on this complaint is going to be a state or a city or a county fair housing agency that HUD has a relationship with, that they hire, they contract to investigate the case. If that's it, you don't respond to HUD. You wait till you get the announcement from that other agency and you respond to that agency. That will be in HUD's notice. It will identify the agency as either HUD or a referral agency, and you go from there.
Very good.
Now, the second step, Jonathan, is going to apply to all situations, just as the first step did, and that is to decide whether to hire a attorney to represent your property, your management company, and anybody else who is listed as a respondent in the complaint. And that's a pretty big decision. Now, I am sharing with you my suggestions for how to handle complaints being an attorney, okay? That I can't share with you everything that I've learned in my career. So there are a lot of things an attorney can do for you, hopefully, which will be different and maybe better than you would do for yourself. But again, I don't think you need to hire an attorney for every single complaint that's filed, but you do need to consider whether this is more of a complex allegation, whether there are other factors with this resident, whether you need to decide if you might have liability, and if so, how high it is. Those are all issues that you have to decide. You also have to figure out whether your insurance company will hire a lawyer to represent you. In administrative complaints, they seldom do, but you still have to notify your liability carrier and ask if they will defend this complaint for you. Like I said, most of the time they don't, but it's still important that you notify them. So now we've made that decision. Either someone in the company is going to be handling the defense of this fair housing complaint, or you're going to have a lawyer do it. And in that case, I'll talk to you about what the lawyer will do or what you should do if you're handling it. One person needs to be responsible for this complaint if you're handling it yourself. Again, a regional. It probably shouldn't be the property manager if you can avoid that. It needs to be a higher corporate employee, I would suggest. And they need to be the go-to person on all things involving this fair housing complaint. So that should be like the second step is deciding who's going to represent, who's going to handle all the inquiries, who's going to handle pulling together the information. And then we move on to the third step, which is very important. And that is to pull together all the relevant files. Don't forget emails and text if your employees use them to communicate with their residents. Pull all that together and take a look at what the facts are of the context, interactions between employees of the property and this particular resident. Maintenance, work orders, anything relevant to this person's tenancy or application, if that's the case, to your property.
Very nice. So 3 super, super important steps. So we're making a dent into this 8-step process. So now it looks like we get the employees involved. So what's step number 4, Kathy?
Okay, so once you've got an idea of what kind of documentation there is available, now you need to know what employees are going to say about the situation with this resident, because part of the investigation is going to be the investigative agency interviewing employees. They are always going to interview the property manager. And if that resident has had contact with maybe the regional or the compliance director or anybody else, they're also going to want to interview that person. So you need to find out who this resident has had contact with, and then someone needs to talk to them to find out what happened during that during those contacts. Be aware that during those interviews, the investigative agency, let's say the investigator, let's call him that, the investigator is going to ask employees about policies, about training, about procedures. So it doesn't hurt to ahead of time remind your employees of what applies to that situation so that they don't sit there and look like they've never heard the idea that your property might have policies or forms or procedures that they should have used. Whether they did or not, they need to know what the applicable policies and procedures were. Okay, so usually between the time a complaint is filed and the time an investigator talks to employees is months and months. And you will get the notice that the investigator wants to set up interviews and will list the employees. So you don't have to do that early in the process. In fact, it's probably better to do it after you've been noticed which employees the investigator wants to talk to. Now, if you have an attorney, they can sit in on those interviews. If you don't have an attorney, another staff person is not going to be able to sit in on those interviews. So you may not know what the employees are telling the investigators, again, unless you have an attorney that is there participating in that interview. After that, I think it's important that you have a chronology of dates and times with everything that applied. When did that complainant sign a lease? When did they put in a maintenance work order? When did they contact the manager about this problem? When did they make a reasonable accommodation request? And when was it processed? All of those, whatever the relevant facts are, need to be included in the chronology. So you know, and then the investigative agency knows, because you're going to share that with them in the response to the complaint, so that they know what happened during that entire process, whatever the process was, that is the subject of the fair housing complaint. So that's the 5th step in this 8-step process. The 6th step is review all the applicable policies, forms, and training that might have been relevant to the claims that are made by the complainant in this complaint. So were your staff trained in fair housing? And I sure hope you can say yes. I know your staff were, because you're listening to this video. So those dates of the training and all of that information should be gathered together. And one reason you want to do that is so you can make your own analogy of whether those policies, procedures were violated or not. If they were, you need to know that. It is not good to avoid that. If they weren't, then you know you have a stronger defense, and that's good too. But you can't make that decision until you've really done your research to know whether you have policies that were violated or not. The 7th step, and this is an important one, now that you did the step in 6 in looking at applicable policies and procedures, and then apply those to the facts of the complainant situation, the 7th step is to decide, were there mistakes made by the staff? Were they maybe out of sync with the applicable policies? If they were, you have a weaker case, and there should be a motivation to try to settle it, or what we call conciliate, resolve the complaint. And to do that just takes negotiation between the complainant, and if they have an attorney or representative, and your company and your representative. And you can go back and forth to see if you can get the complainant to agree to conciliate it. Sometimes money is involved. Other times it's not involved. You can give the complainant something they want without it being cash. Sometimes it also needs to be cash. And how much money is going to involve how much potential liability you have. This is where an attorney becomes more important, is in deciding whether you have potential liability, and if so, how much. For instance, what I would do in deciding that is I would go read cases and see how much money complainants were awarded in fair housing cases. And if the complainant is asking for $100,000 and you read 5 cases and they got 15 or 20,000, obviously you're not going to offer them 100,000. You're going to offer them maybe 10 or 5 to conciliate the case. That's something that I can't share with you. That just is experience, but that is when a lawyer is the most important, I think.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Kathy. And just for our listeners, there's going to be a bullet list downloadable PDF of these 8 steps. We're up to number 7, and Kathy has gone into a great amount of detail for help all of us to understand what's involved with each of them. But you're also going to have a nice resource and reference. So be sure to take a look at that in the show notes, or if you're on the website, you'll be able to download it from there also. So there's a lot that's there. We've covered a lot of ground. So drum roll, here we go. Point number 8. What do we have to do, Kathy?
Number 8 is something I really do want to mention because in my career, I just thought this was the one that most of my clients failed to do. A fair housing complaint and defending it is a painful process. There is no doubt about it. It's upsetting. A lot of times people get very angry because they've been accused of discriminating. And sometimes because of all of that emotion, because of all the effort and money laid out to defend a fair housing complaint, sometimes companies fail to take that lemon and make at least a little lemonade out of it by finding something positive. And that would be, is there lessons we could have learned from why this complaint was filed? What happened? Could we avoid it maybe the next time by doing different training, maybe more customer service training, by maybe changing some policies and procedures, altering the forms that we use for reasonable accommodation? Whatever the issue is that's involved in the fair housing case, let's see if we can avoid it next time. And I think that kind of Monday morning quarterbacking, if we want to call it that, is valuable, especially at the corporate level. So I would suggest adding that number 8 step for every fair housing complaint you have, again, at a very high level, to see if there were lessons that could be learned. Sometimes there aren't. Some fair housing cases are just stupid. They never should have been filed. There's no lessons to be learned. But sometimes there are. And that's when I would hope that rather than just getting angry, you see if there are alterations you can make that might make this more avoidable in the future. So please take that to heart and see if that might help you make some positive use of all fair housing cases that are filed against you or your company.
Very good. Thank you very much, Kathy. A lot of detail in these 8 steps to following up with a fair housing complaint. Okay, Kathy, that was a meaty topic, and now we get into our our game show phase of our episode today, our Fast Five. And instead of Monopoly dollars, you could win a lifetime supply of Skittles from some agency I have no affiliation with whatsoever. It's imaginary, but just imagine a world full of Skittles, rainbows. That could be the grand prize if you can answer these Fast Five questions in 90 seconds or less. So are you ready?
I'm ready, Jonathan, but it doesn't seem to matter whether I'm ready or not. I always blow it on this one, but let's give it a go.
That's okay. That's okay. That's why I make up fake prizes, because I understand how difficult it is to be able to answer fair housing related questions in a short period of time. But we love them because they really highlight the key points for our audience. So here we go. Is it always necessary to hire an attorney to represent your property in a fair housing complaint?
The short answer is no, it is not always necessary. It depends on how difficult, complicated, complex the fair housing complaint allegations are.
If you know your staff did nothing wrong, but a resident claims her fair housing rights were violated, should you plan to fight the claim until your innocence is proclaimed by the investigative agency?
Probably not. And the reason is you need to make decisions how to defend yourself, whether to resolve the complaint prior to a decision based on business reasons, not on your emotion. So whether you're in the right or in the wrong, the decision should be made not from an emotional point of view, but just what is the most practical for your business.
How can a housing provider avoid a claim of retaliation after a resident files a fair housing complaint?
This is important if anyone ever does file a complaint against you, and we have much more education about retaliation on another video. But the answer is, be careful if you're going to take any punitive action against a resident who has filed a fair housing complaint, including non-renewal. That is seen as a punitive action. And basically what you need to be able to prove is you have taken similar actions against other people for similar reasons, and those people had never filed a complaint. So if that's the case, then fine, make sure you've got it documented, but be extra careful with anybody who has filed a complaint against you.
Should you count on the investigative agency to understand the law and the facts involved in the fair housing complaint it is investigating?
So in my 35 years of working with complaints, this is what I would say. No, never trust the investigative agency. It's better if you spoon feed them the facts and how they apply to the law and what that means, rather assuming they're going to do a good job in the investigation. Some agencies do, and some agencies are terrible, and you need to tell them what the applicable facts in law are that apply to this particular complaint.
Are there lessons a housing provider can learn from a fair housing complaint?
In many complaints, yes, there are lessons that can be learned that can benefit you as a housing provider. And I strongly recommend you take a look at each complaint to see if there are lessons that can be learned, and if so, then implement those to avoid similar future complaints.
Very good. Thank you, Kathy. So no unlimited Skittles and rainbows for you today. But, rainbows just come at all kinds of wonderful times anyway, so you can go outside and enjoy them after the next rainstorm or something. But 3 minutes and 30 seconds approximately. So, but that was still, again, five meaty
Worse
questions.
than normal.
Yeah. Well done. Well done. We appreciate having you on the show. And for our audience, we know like this is a sensitive topic. You can feel like I need to have justice served when someone makes a complaint against you, because it can affect you to the core, your emotions, because we know all of you are doing your very best to upload the fair housing law, and it can be personal, but don't take it personal. Kathy mentioned that in the Fair Housing Fast Five. Don't get emotional about it. Remember, this is business, and you need to follow the steps. Download this document, this 8 steps that we're going to provide for you. Use this as a reference, this episode, to help you when you are facing a complaint, and that will help get you the proper frame of mind when dealing with these situations. So we're here for you. This is the reason why we provide this extra bonus educational information on fair housing. So thank you for being part of our community. We appreciate you very much. So that'll do it for today's episode 61 of the Fair Housing Insiders. Thank you, everyone. Take care. We'll see you soon.